Hi everyone, today we're going to talk about doing our outline for our black and white essay. So you'll need to pull up the outline from Schoology, and you're also going to need this, which is your quote chart. So you're going to need both of those. So let's go back to the outline. The first thing that we have to do is we have to get an attention getter, something that's going to capture your reader's attention with an anecdote, quote, or fact. So if I look at my quote chart, you'll notice on yours that there's this very last one that has a big X through it. That's because this is what I'm going to use to write my example. So I'm going to write about racism through Knott's everyday experiences. So to get some type of intro attention getter, I'm going to do quotes about racism. And I'm going to try to find one that I like. That's also going to go with the themes that we see in black and white. I don't really like any of these. Let's see. Let's go back. Let's go to images and see if I can find one on there that I like. I think that I like this one best. In a racist society, it's not enough to be non-racist, we must be anti-racist. I think that one is going to make the most sense. So I'm just going to split my screen. So here in my attention getter, I'm going to type that in. In a racist society, it is not enough to be spelled today. We must be anti-racist. And that is by Angela Davis. So let's make this match the rest of our format. Okay, so now background information. Identify the situation or event you're explaining and provide important background information using at least 3 sentences. So the other thing that I have to do in this is I have to mention the author and the title. So I'm going to say this quote relates to Callum, one of the major characters in Mallory Blackman's black and white. And remember, when we're typing, titles go in italics. In the story, Callum, who is a Knott, best friends with Seffi, who was a cross. Seffi does not understand the discrimination that Callum experiences. Callum uses his everyday experiences to show the way he gets treated differently because of the color of his skin. So I'm going to go back and make sure that that is where I need it to be. And I'm going to unfold it. Okay, so now my position statement. My position statement is also called my thesis. My position statement is going to be right here on this chart. So all I have to do is copy and paste it. Okay. So when I go to write my intro paragraph, this is all I have to do is just combine these three sections. So now on to my body paragraphs. So my body paragraphs are made up by claim. My claim is my topic sentence. Context, what's going on right before that quote. Evidence, which is going to be the actual quote. Warrant, how does this evidence prove my topic sentence? And then my conclusion is going to be a transition from this paragraph to the next paragraph. So when I look at my quote chart, it tells me here up at the top before my quote what I'm going to be talking about. So this information is what I should make my topic sentence out of. So it says having to watch their every move. So I'm going to show that Callum has to watch his every move. So in the story, Callum shows the discrimination he feels through describing his everyday experiences being a knot. So now my context, I gotta look back here. And it says, I didn't want to blame her for the way the police treated me and every other knot I knew. I didn't want to hold her responsible for the way security guards and store detectives followed me around every time I entered a department store. And I stopped going into bookshops and toy shops and gift shops when I realized that no matter where I went in them, all eyes were upon me. After all, it was one of those well-known cross-initiated facts that we knots didn't pay for anything when there was a chance of stealing it instead. I didn't want to resent Seffi for the way my education was automatically assumed to be less important than hers. So I know that Callum is thinking this when he's on the train after the police bother him. So I'm going to have to explain that. Callum and Seffi decide to go to Celebration Park for a picnic. Seffi bought them first-class tickets for the train. But Callum was the only knot in that section. So remember that when we're talking about literature, we have to talk in the present tense. But in this instance, this is Callum looking back. So this is something that actually happened in the past in the novel, so we would use past tense. The police were doing checks, and they started to harass Callum because they thought he did not belong there. So now I have to do my evidence. So I'm just going to go and I'm going to take my quote. So my quote in each of these is set up properly. So it has the correct format with the quotation marks and then the citation at the end. So now that I have my quote there, what I need to do now is my warrant. I have to explain, how does this show the discrimination that he feels through describing his everyday experiences? Callum describes the experiences he has when doing normal, everyday things, like going to the store, people assume that he will steal things because of the color of his skin. So they follow him around the store. This makes him less likely to go shopping or do anything that he enjoys because he has to be careful of what he's doing and how he acts. So now my conclusion, I have to shift to the next paragraph. So if I look back on my quote chart, it's going to talk about how he constantly is hearing about the bad stuff they do, but they never hear about the bad stuff the crosses do. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to write a sentence that links those two. Callum is aware he has to be on his best behavior because he knows that only the bad things knots do get reported, never the good things. So now my claim for paragraph 2 is going to be very similar to that. Callum's racist experiences get shown by the way knots get portrayed in society. So now I have to put my context. What's happening right before the quote? So the quote says the newsreader finished the story of a banker who'd been sent to prison for fraud and was now talking about 3 knot robbers who'd smashed in the front of an exclusive jewelry store and made off on motorbikes with gems and jewelry and watches worth close to $1 million. Why was it that when knots committed criminal acts, the fact that they were knots was always pointed out? The banker was a cross. The newsreader didn't even mention it. So I'm going to explain there is a news story about 2 criminals, about 2 crimes. One was a bank robbery and one was a fraud case. The bank robbers were knots, and the news mentions it. But the bank robber, not the bank robber, the fraud case was committed by a cross but the news didn't mention his race. So then I'm going to go back and I'm going to copy my quote again. And just paste it right into where it says evidence. So now my warrant, I have to explain how does that quote show that the knots get portrayed in society. So put, this quote shows that society portrays noughts and crosses in a different light. When a naught does something bad, the first thing society does is point out skin color. When crosses do something wrong, skin color is never mentioned. It shows read that knots get portrayed in a negative way, while the media protects crosses from getting shown in any negative way. So now I have to do my link from this paragraph to the next one. So if I go back to my quote chart, I'm talking about how there's constant reminders that they're always noughts. The fact that noughts are always shown in a negative light also causes society to constantly remind noughts that they are the lower class. So then my claim for body paragraph 3 is going to be very similar. Noughts have constant reminders that they are not equal or worth as much just because of the color of their skin. So there's my claim. So now I have to look at my context and my quote. So, how's your head, I asked, pointing at the plaster. It's okay, it'll take more than a stone step to dent my head. I smiled. That plaster is a bit noticeable. They don't sell pink plaster, only dark brown ones. Shania shrugged. My eyes widened at that. I'd never really thought about it before, but she was right. I'd never seen any pink plasters. Plasters were the color of us crosses, not the knots. So I'm going to explain when Seffi sits with Callum and the other knots in the cafeteria, she notices the Band-Aid on Shania's head. She comments that it stands out, and Shania tells her that they do not make pink Band-Aids. And then my quote. So I'm just going to go back to my quote chart and copy it and paste it right in here. So if you look, the way that the quote is set up on the quote chart is correct. So you'll notice that there are new lines, and that's because every time you have a speaker, you have to have a new line. And you'll notice here that you have 3 quote marks instead of just 2, and that's because we have to have quote marks to show that it's coming from the book, and then a single quote mark to show that somebody in the book is saying it. So now I have to do my warrant. How does that show that they're not equal or worth as much? The fact that they do not make Band-Aids that match the skin color of knots is a constant reminder that they are not equal with the crosses. Using Band-Aids that match cross skin makes knots stand out even more. Small, everyday occurrences like this constantly remind knots that they are not good enough just because of the color of their skin. And I'm going to add a sentence here. Even more, society is not willing to make Band-Aids that are the same skin color because they do not feel that it is important for knots to be able to have the same luxuries as crosses. So now my conclusion. So for this one, I'm actually going to delete it, and you can delete it too. You don't need this because we're going to be going into our conclusion. So our conclusion says that we're going to restate our thesis. And when we say restate, we mean restate, not just type word for word. So if I go back up to my thesis is, he describes the everyday experiences of knots through the events of their daily lives. So I'm going to put throughout the book, Callum and other knots experience racism. Blackman shows this through the everyday experiences that knots have. So here I'm going to recap paragraphs 2, 3, and 4. So I want one sentence that's going to summarize each of these. So I'm going to go back up and remind myself I wrote about here, everyday experiences of being a knot. So I'm going to put Callum, experiences racism every day when he goes about his life, such as being followed in stores and not having access to a good education. And then here I wrote about the way that they get portrayed in society. They get portrayed in society in a negative way. Anytime a knot does something bad, they report on the color of their skin, not just the crime. This does not happen when a cross does something bad. But finally, discrimination gets shown through reminders of skin color and unequal status. Society does not make products that would help make knots more equal, such as pink colored Band-Aids. So here for my clincher, I want to go all the way back up and I want to link it to my attention getter. In a racist society, it's not enough to be non-racist, we must be anti-racist. So we're going to put something like even though some people in Callum's society are not racist, not experience so much discrimination that they need more than being not racist to help turn society around. They need people to be anti-racist to help combat their everyday experiences, their portrayal in the media, and their constant reminders of their unequal skin color. Let me know if you guys have any questions.